Thank you all for being here. My name is Richard Poppino. I am John's nephew. I'm very honored to be here for many reasons, but among them, I think there are many of you who could do him just as much justice with very affectionate, illuminating, funny stories. So, and I hope that you will take the opportunity to share some of them later in the service. I knew John for 64 years. I'm only aware of having known him for about 58 or 59 years. And then even in that period there were some gaps. So I can't vouch for absolutely the entire period, but I think all of my observations are going to hold true. As I said, I think many of you could do him justice up here as well. And I think another thing that is a part of the measure of the man is there's probably no one here, with the possible exception of my Aunt Mary, who understands how many lives he touched. Just look at all of you here. So he had, in a very unassuming, direct way, an enormous gift for connecting with people. And thank you for being here to honor him. A couple examples of this. You would find it in various strange places, or at least I did. When I first started teaching at OSU in the mid-90s, John was working for the extension service there, and so he had an email address. It was his secondary, maybe his tertiary email. But this was back in the days when email wasn't as well organized as it is now, and didn't have as many security safeguards as it does now. The upshot is, I received a lot of his email, which I then forwarded on. But I knew by that point not to be amazed at how many people he knew and how much of a correspondence he kept up with people. But I was fascinated by it. It wasn't just, it was in his local area, it was throughout the state of Oregon, and then went out to the whole world. Actually knows people all over the place. Several years ago, my wife Tina and I were driving through John Day, and we stopped for gas. Keep in mind, this is now 40 years, in excess of 40 years after John and Mary and the family had left John Day, where John was working for the Forest Service. So we stopped at the gas station. I handed the lady who had pumped the gas my card, and she said, "Oh, are you related to John Poppino?" And she spoke of him very fondly. She wanted to know how he was doing, spoke of him very fondly. And keep in mind, this is in an area where not everybody speaks fondly of federal officials. So he left a mark, a very positive one, for that one person that lasted well over 40 years. In my experience, and my experience never varied in this regard, John had the gift of treating everybody he met exactly the same way. That is to say, with openness, kindness, respect, and also interest, and with full attention. He also assumed that everybody he met had a sense of humor. And whether they did or not, I think almost everybody was charmed by his. More on that in a moment. As my cousin Bruce has pointed out, his father was famous or infamous, depending on the day and your point of view, for being the last one to leave most gatherings, and he frequently had to be dragged away. And this was not because he was partying hardy, it's because he was avidly engaged in conversation with one friend or another, as likely to be new as to be an old friend. He was incapable of giving anybody the bum's rush. He always gave you his full attention. And this was not simply because he was polite, but it was because he had a knack for enjoying people and finding in each individual where the gold was, what was interesting, what was unique and engaging about that individual. I'd like to mention a few of the constants in his life. I think first and foremost is his Air Force sweetheart, his wife of 62 years, my Aunt Mary. She wasn't in the Air Force, but he met her when he was. And then the large extended family that ensued from their marriage, all of whom feel his loss terribly. Another constant was the forest, woodlands, in many guises and manifestations. As a forestry student at Oregon State University, go Beavs. I'm glad to see that several of you are wearing proper beaver attire, including various members of my family. In a long and successful career with the Forest Service, as an avid but humane and very principled hunter, as an independent tree farmer and consultant, which included, along with Mary, twice winning the Oshawa Tree Farmer of the Year award, and he served as the president of that organization. I think his feeling for the forest, for woodlands, is concentrated most intently on one particular site, and it's impossible to talk about him for very long without mentioning what the family knows as the ranch. It's known officially as the Lazy R.V. Tree Farm near Escacada, and it's property that has been in my family's, it's been in my family since 1943. I think the expression, he would have wanted it that way, is overused. It's a cliche that gets tossed off as a toast most of the time. But I do think that if John had been offered a choice of where to spend his last fully conscious moments on earth, that would have been it. He would have wanted it that way. I also know that he would have wanted you to have a wonderful time at the upcoming reception, so please honor his wishes, at least as interpreted by me. Another constant, many of you know about this, his Model A, and other people's Model A's. More about that in a second. Travel, and these range from detailed explorations of his immediate surroundings, which always fascinated him, to long journeys across the country and overseas. And it didn't matter what the scope of these travels was. He was always motivated by curiosity, and he would take in his experiences with remarkable powers of observation. My cousin Robin traces the family's love, this is everybody in the family practically, their love of going off the beaten path to a tradition of weekend drives in her family to explore nearby places, sometimes without itineraries, just simply wandering to see where the road took them. This tradition extended to her very last phone conversation with John. She let him know that she and her husband Ray had booked a trip to Scotland in June. And John reminded her that he and Mary had spent a month in Scotland without any reservations or set travel plans other than the plane there and the plane back. The rest of it was all improvised, and that's the way he wanted it to be. Robin put it very poetically, the wanderer is not always lost. Parenthetically, and I think many of you can vouch for this, John's stories, his powers of observation got translated into stories with enormous amounts of detail. But he seldom got lost, like the wanderer who never gets lost. Normally, if you're hearing a story and 5 minutes into it, the story hasn't taken you out of the driveway, You start to wonder, how long is this going to take? Well, with John's stories, it was never like that. He was so fascinated with what he experienced, and his fascination rubbed off on you. So far from getting in the way, these details contributed to the story. And most people can't even write stories like that if they were allowed weeks of reflection, but much less can they speak extemporaneously that way. But he could, and it's taken me a while to realize what an amazing gift that was, but I remember lots of things that he said very fondly. As far as experiences off the beaten path, I have one that verges not only on off the beaten path, but just off-road. I was visiting the ranch, I was a teenager, and several family members were up there. Uncle Johnny had just proudly completed, you'll know what the air quotes mean in a moment, work on his Model A, meaning that it was more or less in one piece, and that it could be driven. So I was very happy to take a ride with him, and we progressed from the main drag, Squaw Mountain Road, now known as Tumalo Mountain Road, to even smaller side roads, to logging roads, and finally to an overgrown logging road that qualified more as a trail. And I was amazed. I shouldn't have been, but I was. And I was amazed that he even knew this road was there, road in big quotation marks, much less that he could drive on it in the Model A. He took delight in pointing out various features of the car, including the heating system. And he said the heating system was just a curved pipe that extended to the lower backside of the engine. That was the heater. And he said, makes a good heater in the wintertime. Pause. Makes a good heater in the summertime. The reason for the air quotes back a moment ago is that some of you may have different experiences. I personally only saw the Model A put together fully and functional twice, and those were 25 years apart. So I've seen, yes, so I've heard. So anyway, I've seen photographs, I've heard reports, but it was, most of the time it was a work in progress on John and Mary's garage floor. Another constant for John was St. Paul's Church. When I moved to Portland the first time, I've had several incarnations in Portland, it was in 1978, and I was still an active musician. At the time, I sang here several times and enjoyed that, and I attended the celebration, their 50th anniversary celebration, and John's 80th birthday celebration. I know St. Paul's has been proud to have a member who so clearly lived the ideals of a Christian life. I'm almost done, by the way. Everybody remarks on John's sense of humor. I like to think that it was partly hereditary. Both his brother and sister were also great humorists in their own way. My dad, Raleigh, known in the immediate family as Ed, had the driest of the senses of humor. And it took you a while to get it, but then once you did, you couldn't stop laughing. My Aunt Doris had a particularly fine eye for the absurd and the ironic, as well as a gift for finding just the right words to call your attention to. In Uncle Johnny's case, his sense of humor was, in my experience, more lyrical, and it's a notable feature that it fit directly into the rhythm and flow of his speech. It would just sort of come and go. And one incident was when he came to dinner at the ranch. This is when both my grandparents were still alive. And I noticed, but for some reason didn't say anything about the fact that he had an enormously swollen thumb. It was all black and blue, enormously swollen. He didn't make any mention of it at all. Finally, my grandmother saw it and said, "What on earth did you do?" And he said, oh, I just hauled off with a hammer and hit it as hard as I could. The conversation went on. So he was most certainly a good man who enriched the lives of many, many people. He certainly did mine. He was a much beloved man, and I believe a great man. And we miss him tremendously. And it has been an honor to know him all these years.